before I get my panel to introduce themselves, we're going to have a look at another of our polls. So if you could please bring the poll up. Right, so we asked our audience, what are the biggest barriers to creating a startup culture in Egypt? And if you look at the results, you can see 46% say bureaucratic barriers to starting up a business. That is the biggest barrier. So I'm going to keep the poll up there. You can carry on voting, and we'll come back to it later in the session. I'm going to ask my panel, starting with you, Wael, if you could introduce yourselves, explain who you are, what you do, how you fit into the startup ecosystem.
So my name is Wael Amin. I am a partner at Sawari Ventures. Sawari is one of the few venture capital funds available that invests in Egypt as well as Tunisia and Morocco. Over the past 3 years, we have done more than 100 investments, both at the seed and the growth stage across the region. Previously, before Sawari Ventures, I was an entrepreneur myself. 20 years ago, I co-founded a company called IT Works, which was one of the early technology companies that has grown and become one of the largest regional IT companies in the Middle East.
Thank you, Amr.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amr Al-Abd. I'm the managing director of Egypt Ventures. This is a new investment firm that was set up recently to invest in the entrepreneurship ecosystem at large. We invest in high growth businesses, we invest in accelerators, and we invest and support also the venture capital industry. Previously, I've been part of the ecosystem, I think, for the last maybe 15 or 17 years. I've been an entrepreneur myself, founded several companies, and I also founded an NGO. I think it was the first in Egypt to promote entrepreneurship. So I've seen the ecosystem actually from the NGO side, from the business side, and now with an investment firm that is partly owned by the government.
Fantastic. So we've got our two investors, but also the entrepreneurs. Let me come on to you now, Abdelhamid. Can you tell me what you do? I mean, I love what you do, so tell the audience what you do and how you fit into the ecosystem.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Abdelhamid Sharara. I'm the co-founder and CEO of RiseUp. At RiseUp, we organize fairly the largest startup conference in the Middle East. It's been 4 years since now. The event is very collaborative, so it's built over the idea of all the stakeholders of the startup ecosystem in Egypt and the Middle East collaborating together to co-organize the event, whether government, investors, entrepreneurs, media, corporates, and even accelerators and incubators. So the idea of RiseUp is to be sort of a convener or a common place where everyone connects annually over the course of the year. And currently, we're in the process of scaling that and looking at providing an online platform that will also connect startups with the resources where as a startup needs these access to all of these resources, they can find it online, and it will be called RiseUp Connect. You can go on riseupconnect.com right now. The company was co-founded by me and 3 of my partners, Khan, who's an early angel investor and entrepreneur as well, Gehed, who's a journalist, and Mohammed. We have people attending from 60 countries so far, and we work with the largest companies right now in the technology world, and I'm very happy being here with all our partners and friends, so excited to talk about stuff.
So you're like our enabler, catalyst man, but also an entrepreneur. Fantastic.
Exactly, yes. This is my 3rd company as well.
Yeah. And finally, Amir, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amir Sharif. I am CEO and co-founder of a company called Basharsoft. We're the company behind Egypt's biggest online recruitment platforms, Wazzaf.com and forusna.com. There are 2 platforms which Wazzaf is targeting employment for the white-collar university graduates, and Forusna is targeting the middle educated to the basic educated and blue-collar workforce in Egypt. We've been around for 7 years now. We are a 200+ employee company. We've raised funding from all the different methods of funding, from friends and family to angel investors, from government support, and we also participated in global accelerators like 500 startups in Silicon Valley, and we also recently raised one of the biggest Series A investments from international investors from Europe in an internet company in Egypt. And yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you very much. So let's start by looking at the, the start of the ecosystem for entrepreneurs. Does Egypt have enough of them, entrepreneurs? I mean, there are nearly 100 million people living in Egypt, but is the education system here working that it produces entrepreneurs? Well, I'm going to start with you.
I think there are two ways of looking at this question, right? The first question is, do we have enough entrepreneurs to address the challenges that we suffer from in the economy? And the answer to that is a resounding no. So everywhere we look, whether it's education, health, financial services, transport, any really industry that you look at, retail, you see the challenges and you see the opportunities. And I think the days of sitting back and waiting for the government to address these challenges are gone. Yeah. And only Egyptian entrepreneurs are going to be able to tackle these very Egyptian problems and find solutions to them. So when you look at the amount of challenges and opportunities that we have in the economy, I think the answer is we do not have enough entrepreneurs. The second way of answering this question is to look at the available capital. Capital is essentially the key resource that entrepreneurs need to tackle the challenges, right? And Egypt, unfortunately, has a lot more entrepreneurs today than capital. So it's a capital-constrained ecosystem. We have the entrepreneurs, we have the challenges and the opportunities, but simply there is not enough capital that goes in the form of equity investment to early-stage companies, risk capital that entrepreneurs can use. Yeah. And I know this was a common theme at this conference last year as well. I think probably the country has inched in the right direction, but when you compare sort of the capital to entrepreneur ratio to other ecosystems like Saudi, UAE, Lebanon, etc., I think there is a long, long way to go.
Yeah. So, I mean, as an entrepreneur, do you agree with Wael that it's actually the lack of capital which is inhibiting the growth of the entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Definitely, there's a huge lack of capital in Egypt. I believe there are so many entrepreneurs in Egypt, but at the bottom, top of the funnel, there are so many people with ideas and there's so many challenges to be solved, but the levels of support, at very early stages have been very few. And until the pipeline narrows down for bigger rounds and Series A with VCs, they become extremely few. So there's huge potential for entrepreneurs, but there is lack of funding, especially in the very early rounds. Whether accelerators, there's a couple of in Egypt, but they're not enough for the population. And there is also a lack, after acceleration, like a range of $20,000 to $200,000. This is a huge gap. There's like accelerators and there's like bigger VCs. So there's definitely a gap here. Yeah. Exactly, in Egypt.
Okay, and Amr, I mean, you are a newly funded, newly founded organization. Are you here to plug that gap? Tell me a bit about Egypt Ventures and how you can help.
Actually, Egypt Venture was created to sort of support the overall ecosystem in Egypt. We want to see, because we cannot just move on the sort of the funding gap only. We have to sort of move in parallel on a number of dimensions that are critical for the ecosystem to sort of develop. And I just want to touch upon a point of the lack of capital or the scarcity of capital. There's also a scarcity of intelligent or smart capital, because sometimes you can have capital, but it doesn't have sort of the expertise and the knowledge to support the startup throughout the phases. And there is also a gap in that area. Okay. So we're coming in, we're trying to support VCs, because our role is also to support VCs. We will invest in VCs, and we will co-invest with them. We're not there to sort of crowd them out. Okay. And also to support the pipeline with new startups in the acceleration phase. So we've set up 3 accelerators. One will be for fintech, one will be for social impact, and one is sort of a general accelerator. So we're just hoping to fill in some gaps.
Yeah.
Abdulhamid, I mean, you know so many entrepreneurs. You run the Rise Up. What do you think needs to be done to encourage them? To encourage them to come up with ideas, and what can you see as the one thing that needs to be done to the ecosystem?
I think from the encouragement point of view, the entrepreneurs are really encouraged already. There are a lot of people who want to take risks, specifically my generation, not necessarily the fresh graduates. We've seen waves of people who just leave university and then try to start their own business, but people our age. I think the holistic view of an ecosystem is the thing that would encourage people to do. So it's investment, it's talent, incentives, the infrastructure. If the internet in Egypt just increases in speed, it would be a huge encouragement for people to start businesses and to operate. So it's the view of what an ecosystem is. You look at all the domains, and I think the more and the better the quality of each domain, the more we'll have a more inducive and an ecosystem that will attract people to start businesses.
We can compare, Egypt's ecosystem with, lots of others. I mean, we do a conference in Lebanon where the BDL have done the Circular 331. So there's a huge amount of now venture capital looking for. So it's the flip. There's so much capital and actually not enough entrepreneurs. So do you think initiatives like that need to be introduced here in Egypt? Wael, is it something that, you can compare different ecosystems? What needs to be taken, cherry-picked from, some of the others to make it work here?
Yeah, so I think the most interesting aspect of the BDL initiative in Lebanon is that it serves as a good case study, trying to find sort of what's the sweet spot, right? How much venture capital investment per capita is needed until you reach a point where you get inflation in the market and inflated valuations, inflated costs, etc. And when you look at the numbers on a per capita basis, you find that the BDL initiative has generated approximately 10 times the venture capital funds available in Egypt, now in Beirut, for probably a fifth of the talent pool, of the educated entrepreneurial talent pool. And yes, at those levels, you're starting to see early signs of inflation in the Lebanese startup ecosystem. And I think the lesson learned from that is you could multiply the venture capital funds available in Egypt and the risk capital available in Egypt by 50 before you start seeing signs of inflation in our economy. And this, I think, is the most important takeaway. And I salute and commend BDL for taking the initiative really into the unknown and putting this program in place. And I think all of the region can learn from that and understand from that what are the levels of venture capital investment or risk capital investment that will be supported by the availability of talent before you start seeing signs of inflation.
Let me come to you. Shahab said yesterday about Egypt Ventures and how you're agnostic on what sectors and areas you invest in. But which sectors do you think are ripe for entrepreneurship, disruption, and development? Do you have a kind of a sweet thing that you think, yes, this is it, this is the sector?
Actually, I think all sectors in Egypt are ripe for disruption right now.
Yeah.
I think we're way back. We're behind the rest of the world in terms of technology. I think there's tons of opportunities. There are some very interesting sectors that we're focused on at the beginning, which is fintech. We think that when you look at sort of the people that have bank accounts in Egypt, it's 10% of the population. And it's a heavily regulated sector. We think that there's a lot of opportunities in that sector. Social impact is another sector, but we're looking across all opportunities. So we think that there are so many opportunities across all sectors, and it's just the innovation of the entrepreneurs and just building a great company.
When people think of startups and entrepreneurs, you often think of people that are in the tech world, the people that are producing apps and digital startups. But actually, what Egypt needs is jobs. We need jobs. So is it that that we need to actually look at startups in agriculture and manufacturing, and not the sectors that aren't going to produce jobs?
Actually, I think Egypt needs to have a vibrant entrepreneurship culture in which great companies are able to grow and thrive.
Yeah.
They are the ones that are going to create the jobs across all sectors. So it's building great companies are the ones that are going to create jobs. Whether it be in agriculture and tech, across all sectors, they all have the potential to create jobs. And we have to differentiate between high quality jobs and sort of low quality jobs. Because if you look at like traditional sectors, which are suffering at the time, being like textiles, they employ millions of people, but they're still low paying jobs, no skills. We want to create sort of the sectors of the future. We want to be part of the technology that is being developed globally and be able to compete. We cannot miss the wave again and just rely on sort of traditional jobs that will keep us very low paying jobs and just very low skilled.
Abdulhamid, you see all the sectors. So, is there any that you think are particularly ripe for disruption?
I think what Amr was pointing on is the differentiation between what is an SME or a small and medium enterprise that either provides a normal service and creates jobs that's 90% or 95% of the economy, and startups that are fast-growing companies, venture-backed companies that take risk and build great companies that solve huge solutions, similar to the solutions that are being solved by the biggest companies in the world like Facebook, Google, Intel, Uber, and all these companies that solved traditional business problems but took them to a new level and changed the world, right? We need a mixture between both, but these are two completely separate activities. These are two completely separate ecosystems that need separate definition or types of support. Banks, they give money to SMEs. VCs give money to startups and fast-growing companies. The returns are much higher on the startup level, but the risk is also very, very high, and that's equity and that's loan-based. So I think on specifically talking about startups, we've seen, as Amr said, fintech, and the greatest story that we should be all proud of, which is Fawry, that has been sold for $100 million. It could have gone even further. I've seen a lot in the renewables sector as well, and there's a lot of businesses going to that space. Egypt is very rich in terms of engineering, so a lot of the engineers are moving now towards that business landscape, and the need for that is there as well. And also seeing a lot of platforms, a lot of the Uber and Careem off, the Wazzaf off. It's like anyone who can provide technology that could connect and regulate a marketplace, from connecting home services with homes, or connecting healthcare, like Visita, for instance. These kind of platforms that connect both nodes of the market are also very lucrative in the space in the past 2 years, I guess.
Let's come back to the investment in startups. Does the regulatory regime need to change? And how can more capital be made available? Do my two investors want to comment? Oh, yes, absolutely.
Absolutely, it needs to change. And that's what the government is actually embarking on. There is a new investment law that it just came out. And this is the first time actually that an investment law talks about entrepreneurship. This is something that I've sort of been asking for the last 15 years.
Does it say?
It's addressing the need for entrepreneurship as a central component for creating economic growth. The Ministry of Investment, this is a breakthrough. When the government is realizing that entrepreneurs can actually build and support in economic growth. Previously, for the last 30, 40, 50 years, the focus was always on just foreign investment or the large companies, sort of traditional sectors. But now we're seeing sort of a move. Now there's the shareholders agreement that is part of that is enforceable by law. So it's baby steps, but it's sort of steps in the right direction. Is it complete? Absolutely not.
I'd like to add something regarding the previous question regarding which sectors and so on. I think it's not, we shouldn't be thinking about which sectors, because like there's all different challenges. The best solution globally now is using technology. So regardless of the sector, it's the technology, and within this technology there's huge software, and all the different industries globally are disrupted by software. So it's not what industries or what sectors. It's using software to make all different business in different sectors much more efficient. Yeah.
Yeah, and for Egypt, you know, you've got your Vision 2030, but actually, you know, to be competitive on a global scale, you've got to invest in these, you know, technologies now.
Exactly.
So yeah, you know, I agree. Coming back to the regulatory regime, you know, you said it was baby steps. Okay, so what else, you know, what else needs to change?
You need an environment that is supportive to the whole ecosystem. You need laws, you need policies, you need support from the education institutions. It's not just the ministry sort of investment. You need the educations coming in and supporting, creating education that brings out future entrepreneurs. We have a very young population, about 2.5 million, just as we speak at university level, and 17 or 18 million at school level. So all these can be future entrepreneurs, sort of, if we give them the proper education. And one of the recommendations was just to include entrepreneurship education across all universities.
But can you teach entrepreneurship? There are a lot of people will say that actually it's something just in, you know, you're an entrepreneur, it's in your gut. You know, can you go to a class and, you know, become an entrepreneur?
You don't go to a class to become an entrepreneur, but you learn the fundamentals and the principles of building a company. What are the path? Whether you take that path or you decide to sort of become an employee, it's your decision. But also the media needs to, and the media plays a very important role in inspiring and motivating people, because when you look at an economy like the US, you have the number of startups is humongous. You have 600,000 new businesses created every year, versus when you look at an economy like Japan, very stable, sort of traditional, moving slowly, still a very strong economy, but it shows that the media, the education can play a role in sort of inspiring people and motivating them to start businesses. And that's what we're hoping that we can create in Egypt, because I think Egyptians are by nature very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So I think if we just give them the proper tools and the proper ecosystem, we can develop it.
But who's responsible for the ecosystem? So I know, you know, we were talking earlier about the SME authority. We're not talking about SMEs, we're talking about entrepreneurs. But is there one body that, you know, should be responsible for creating and linking and, you know, making sure the ecosystem is working? Where?
You want to tackle that?
So I think it's attractive, right, to search for this single entity or silver bullet solution, where you just put one entity or a council or an authority and it just addresses. But the reality is entrepreneurship is an ecosystem. It's really a confluence of a lot of different factors. It spans regulation, it spans policies, it spans the private sector, it spans what the public sector does. This is why it has been so difficult to replicate, right? So, I mean, every government has been trying to replicate like Silicon Valley or replicate that environment in every country in the world, and no one has really gotten it right. And the reason is it's really a complex system, a confluence of factors that need to come together. And I think it really support for entrepreneurship has to permeate government thinking across all of the different ministries, across all of the different entities. And I really do not subscribe to the notion that that you can set up an entrepreneurship agency or an entrepreneurship center and really do what needs to be done.
Has it worked anywhere? You know, it hasn't.
Self-regulatory.
Yeah, can I just add something like definitely not a single entity. It needs, like, we need to invest in the ecosystem. I think what Abdelhamid and Rise Up are doing, they're creating the ecosystem and they're not doing it alone. Like all the different players in the ecosystem, you know, participate and give to, you know, the summit and during the year. It's much better to have, you know, the ecosystem engaged than, you know, one entity, you know, with, you know, full-time employees trying to do this. You can't have, you know, a single entity building all this up.
Yeah, okay. Does anyone, you know, I've got lots more questions, but does anyone want to ask the panel any questions? Is there anything that, you know, no? You're all very quiet today. I will carry on. Oh, yes, we've got one here.
Good afternoon. My name is Ashraf Nasr. I'm from Al Ahli Bank of Kuwait, and I'm interested in general in entrepreneurship due to many reasons. But I've noticed about the barriers comes always on top, the bureaucratic barriers to starting up a business. We always, accuse the government and its bureaucracy. And I don't know why it always comes on top. While I've seen experiences, and I've experienced myself at certain time where it wasn't really it wasn't really the barrier that comes always on top. Do we always want to go and just and name the government somewhere just to put it as a big barrier? Because this is very annoying. I mean, it's when I say the government now, then I won't succeed. But I don't, and I also think that maybe it's up to the business, it's up to the industry, where, I mean, services, it's not always, I mean, the government or bureaucracy does not really come on as a top barrier. That's my question.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, if we look back at this poll, I mean, all of our discussions so far have been that it's about access to capital.
Yes.
So why is everyone in the audience saying, actually, it's all this red tape?
Yeah, can I just add to this? Personally, I'm very surprised that this, especially the topic of starting up the business, this is the main topic always, that Egypt needs to make starting up a business easier.
Yeah.
I believe that the best entrepreneurs are the ones who succeed regardless of any challenges they face, whether bureaucratic or capital or whatever. But for example, in our, in the tech industry, even in Silicon Valley, which is, the best ecosystem in the world, like the success rate of new businesses, almost 10% and 90% fail. Okay, so that's given perfect infrastructure and almost zero bureaucracy, 90% fail. So entrepreneurs don't need additional, challenges to overcome. And actually, the poll has the bureaucratic barriers to starting up a business, and then the barriers to going out of business. What about, the period in between, which is actually the most important? Like starting up a business is, if we reduce it from even a month to 1 day, so what? The business lifetime is years. So what's really, if we're talking about bureaucratic issues, it's the lifetime of the business, not the start, not the end. As an entrepreneur, I have lots of, in my case, I'm solving the employment issue in Egypt. There's so much problems to solve, like opening up a bank account takes time. Online banking in Egypt is extremely, extremely weak. I hope if there's anyone from, banking, online banking is very difficult. Credit cards, we had extreme issues in credit card payments over the past, months. It's been extreme, and any tech company is, we're dependent very large on getting those servers and things up which are paid online. It's a terrible hassle. And then the taxes and social insurance for employees. This is very complex laws in Egypt. For bigger enterprises, usually they hire teams of HR and finance and legal who handle these. But for smaller companies, there is much more important topics to be handled other than dealing with bureaucracy, and it's there. It shouldn't be the number one, but it's an additional point, and so at the start or the end, it's due throughout the life cycle.
Ongoing challenge. We do have a banker in our fabric. Can we just bring the? I don't think you are, but you're the only one that admitted to it.
Very courageous.
You are. You're the only one that admitted to it. So perhaps you could comment back on what Amir said, about how difficult, online banking, all that the difficulties that entrepreneurs face.
Well, generalization in general is not fair, because whilst for the bank I represent, that may be true, that online banking is under development and hopefully will improve. I know of other banks that have quite strong internet banking applications, some other products that you probably can use. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to take this offline. I'm happy to take this offline. But in general, what I can confirm is that the majority of the banks now are very much interested in developing and digitizing their processes, the services that they offer. We are certainly going in that direction, and just so that I'm Expert Development Bank.
Yes.
So we also want to encourage experts.
Okay. Regarding the generalization, we personally right now we have like 4 different accounts with 4 different banks, because no single bank can can serve all our needs. And regarding the online, like the majority, there is only one bank in Egypt which had very strong online presence, as far as I know. It was HSBC. And a couple of years ago, HSBC decided to close all SME bank accounts, and we had our account closed. Here's the check, the remaining money. This is, the best online banking in Egypt was HSBC, and it's not, available for SMEs right now. And like to really, tell what I mean by online banking is that in the US, for example, when you incorporate a company, it's very easy to, process payroll online. Just click of a button and payroll is done from the HR software. Other than in our case, we export Excel files, we send them by email, and then mistakes happen, and then companies, when it gets too complicated, it gets outsourced to companies that do payroll processing. There's huge, anyone here in banking, I can tell you about all the different challenges we face, with the banking sector, which can be improved.
Yeah, so the digital financial ecosystem, which would enable, the entrepreneurs to actually start up and stay in business,
Yes.
isn't there yet. Okay. I mean, are there any...
Amir, let's take this offline. I know what you're talking about. Let's just take this offline.
Well, there'll be another discussion that happens slightly later on. Are there any... There's another question at the back, and then we've got Mrs. Fiani at the front as well. So we'll go to the back first, and then we'll come to the front.
Tarek Rifai with Commerce Bank. I just refer to your comment about inline banking with global banks. I just would like to highlight the difference between global bank and regional bank and the local bank. Its comparison is totally out of guidelines. There is managed expectations, and there is a room to grow. And I should just like to be fair to local banks. They're putting effort to upgrade their online banking systems, which will take time, infrastructure, and good brains as yourself, but this will take time. I just encourage you to manage your expectation when you compare with a global bank and a local bank. Local banks are really trying to catch up, but this will take time. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And we're going to come to the front, to Mrs. Fiani.
In fact, it's not a question, it's rather a comment and a suggestion. I believe that one of the very important points which are a big challenge for the startups is the lack of market linkages, in the sense that we are in a country where there has not been a tradition or a culture in the industrial sector in particular of subcontracting. And so the challenge facing startups is definitely the lack of proper market linkages with their ecosystem, whether to help them identify better their markets or to help them identify better their suppliers. And I would suggest, as it has taken place in different countries, to think in terms of maybe innovation campus, matchmaking between startups and their ecosystem as a mean to help them first grow, second find suppliers or customers, and then hopefully avoid ending by having 90% of the startups going bankrupt.
Thank you very much. I mean, the minister today was talking about, these clusters, industrialization zones, all these ideas and plans. Should we be having within these clusters, innovation centers and innovation campuses? Is this something that's needed?
So we were actually opening up a business branch into such similar space. I think the greatest example for that in Egypt is the Greek campus. If you go into downtown Cairo, you'll find probably one of the largest hubs in the Middle East, or the largest hub for startups. There are more than 140 companies. You don't really have to put much effort into the linkages, because by virtue of having them all in one place,
it happens
naturally in this case. So it's not necessarily innovation campuses and constructing a much harder job for these spaces. I think the fact or the strategy of putting everyone into one place to build an ecosystem works at the beginning and the early stages of an ecosystem. So if there are in other governorates similar spaces that provide that kind of infrastructure, it will definitely have a positive impact on the overall catalysm of the ecosystem, but not necessarily the growth of the companies in this case. It's very important for that kind of early stage. So that's there. On the other linkages, Egypt has a fairly interesting culture of a very collaborative startup ecosystem here. So everyone really tries to work together. People are confident and they trust each other very well between VCs, startups, entrepreneurs, government, and media, and everyone in the stakeholders. And I think this is something very unique that we want to keep, and it's catalyzing things. Back to that point where you're saying, if there's an entity, no, I think we're all really, really doing well as an ecosystem together. What will happen is when even us, get more educated about what we do, and we start finding better ways of working together and going into a deeper part of relations and self-regulatory aspect, rather than coming and having a top-down entity that comes and says legally and policy-wise, this is how it is. So, for instance, we're working on a parallel platform called the Startup Manifesto, which will be just a document, a doctrine, one annual document where all of us would contribute to, and then start introducing to the public so that everyone is educated about entrepreneurs. It will have one part a common vision or roadmap, and the other part would be the regulatory / policy suggestions that we would give to the government in a less bureaucratic aspect in this case. I think in Egypt, it's easier to leave things grow and organically happen rather than coming in and creating a regulation for it.
So the policymakers, regulators, the finances, they all have a role to play, but it should all happen organically.
Organically is not random, okay? So that's the side. There's a huge difference between randomly and organically.
Yeah.
Organically means there is a strategy. We work on the ground. We talk to the policy makers, but it's not controlled or critically governed.
And when we were talking about, you were saying it's just hard just to stay in business. How can startups in Egypt grow into Egypt's next generation of, super big companies? Can Egyptian startups compete internationally, do you think?
I believe they can. There are, I think multiple cases of startups in Egypt which, are competing international. There's like Instabug. They do mobile apps that sell, Silicon Valley and other, major markets. There's I think Visita's, Doctor Plan, software and marketplace is expanding regional. So far, we're still focused in Egypt, but we're still competing with regional and global players in Egypt, and we're doing very well. So definitely, there are. I believe there are. Egyptian startups have the ability to compete globally, especially with the recent, changes in the currency with the devaluation. Yeah. We became even more efficient regarding cost. Margins when selling global are even better. The thing that's lacking still is, I believe, there is of course some issues in talent, which due to education system. But I think there is enough still talent that can solve a lot of problems. I think with support from capital and smart money that really connects to further opportunities, there is huge potential for growth. Like in our case, after we almost shut down 2 or 3 times in 2012, 13. It was extremely difficult time. But then when we reached a point where we became investable and attractive for even international investors, we raised more than almost $2 million from 90% of it from international investors, and now there is even more interest from international investors. So there is this gap when local companies they get through it, there is much more opportunity. So it's this darkness in between that needs to be addressed.
And yes, go ahead.
I think this is a very valid point actually that Amir just mentioned. These stories must be shown to the people.
Yeah.
We must celebrate our successes, because not only does it help them grow, but it also inspires next generations. It shows people that building a great company is not an easy task, but it's doable.
Yeah.
And that the path to success is clear, and some people have done it before, and then you sort of learn from from these people.
And obviously, I mean, Rise Up is doing that job. I mean, your conferences,
It still needs a lot.
Is it just not being picked up by the mainstream media? I mean, you know, they don't, you know.
And we helped 3 TV channels, TV programs develop their own startup-specific content. One of them was for Lamis Hariri, it was a very recent one. We sat with her, advised them on what they should do and what they shouldn't. But again, it's 100 million people. It has to be on top of the policy makers' agenda and all the speeches and all the top-down aspects as a cultural aspect. So it has to be celebrated and endorsed by everyone inside the country. That's one side. And then media also would follow in this case. I think this would be more avail. What we could do is, like what Amr has been suggesting, is to help these media companies and help these content providers specifically or properly address that kind of thing and showcase the stories. There are amazing stories. I really enjoy I studied law. For instance, I was supposed to be a lawyer or a district attorney, and I shifted completely the day I went out when I used to work for an NGO called Injaz.
Yeah.
But just the happiness of seeing these people, you know, develop and push things forward and fight for their dreams, and
Inspiring.
It's very, very inspiring. It's a point of hope, and many times in the past 5 years there was very little of that kind of hope. So I think this is really, as I'm saying, is worth a story worth telling, definitely. But it's again, with the concept, it's maturing. We're just 4 or 5 years old as an ecosystem. I mean, Wael and Amr, they've started companies the wave before that, definitely. But now more and more people are coming. I go to universities all the time. People want to come to this space. This is the thing right now.
It's exciting. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, just to add on this, like personally, I've participated in Rise Up since day one every year, and actually I did like twice get exposure like in media, in radio and TV through participating in Rise Up, but then like a couple of days of exposure of PR focusing on entrepreneurship is not enough.
No.
There's like the media, if anyone here is from media, the main focus is politics, sports, entertainment, that's it. But I believe like the potential in tech, why is tech entrepreneurship really huge? If the biggest 5 companies globally in terms of market cap, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, I'm not sure. Amazon, like this is the future is technology. So I believe that everyone should focus on pushing this new generation of talent into tech, and it requires much less capital than other industries.
Actually, I want to touch upon a point about the 5 companies Amir just mentioned. These 5 companies' market cap are over $2 trillion. That's the amount of wealth entrepreneurs can create. Entrepreneurship is ultimately, it's about wealth creation, but wealth not only in just like in terms of money, but it's wealth in terms of knowledge.
Yeah.
That's why people go to Silicon Valley, because there's accumulated knowledge in terms of people who have done multiple businesses, who've seen it before, and that's sort of the type of experiences that needs to be built in Egypt. And when we have like somebody like Amir come and mentor another startup, they want to see the path. It's the journey that matters to entrepreneurs. So when we talk about media, we want to show the journey, not just that Amir has become successful. No, we want to show what he went through to become successful, and the stigma of failure. Still, there in Egyptian culture, failure is still stigmatized. That if you fail once, you don't start again. Actually, most VCs in the rest of the world, they prefer entrepreneurs that have started a business, whether failed or succeeded, it doesn't matter. But having started a business just have given you the experience to sort of persevere and to build the next big thing.
So people are still, they're still afraid of failure here in Egypt.
Absolutely, and there's still a misconception between entrepreneurship and SMEs. So it is not very clearly defined in sort of people's mindset. And that's why media will have to play a critical role in sort of defining which is which and how can we move in sort of in which direction. Because everybody sort of lumps them together. And I always tell people, you're comparing apple to oranges. SME is by definition defining something by size. Entrepreneurship is usually defining something by age of a business, and the type of business.
An idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Somebody could be an SME that has been in business for 20, 30 years. How could I compare him to somebody who's just started a business 2 years ago? There's nothing to compare.
Thank you, Amr. Yes, I've got another question at the...
I work at the American Embassy, and I've monitored and watched entrepreneurship
Can you use it?
This is not, oh, now it's
Oh,
on. Great.
yeah,
Sorry
yeah.
about that.
That's all right, we just couldn't hear you quite.
A lot of entrepreneurial companies or startups do what's been done elsewhere, right? For all the right reasons. And because there's a growing, huge market and everything's modernizing, that's great. Could you characterize maybe, are there new companies that are genuinely unique? Things that have not been tried elsewhere, not in America or Silicon Valley, not in Europe, and I'm wondering, are you seeing more and more of those? I know of a few, and they're always kind of exciting to watch. But just if maybe Abdul Hamid or the gentleman from Suarez, are you seeing more and more, and what characterizes, what is behind those companies that are really trying a unique value proposition?
Who'd like to start? Made in Egypt, original made in Egypt ideas, okay.
Actually, I think there is merit for both kinds of startups, right? So there are, I don't want to discount, because even if you're doing something that has been done in another market, contextualizing it to Egypt or to the region, working through the social, cultural issues related to that, it's a completely different ballgame. So it may seem in a newspaper article that it's the same business, but it's actually on the inside to succeed in a totally different context is a challenge of its own. But yes, we are seeing indigenous solutions to indigenous problems that maybe do not exist elsewhere, right? I mean, one example we spoke of is Fawry. It's a model that was very specific. I mean, the need and the opportunity was very, very specific to Egypt. Another company, which is one of our investments, and I'm plugging them here, but it's called Money Fellows. Money Fellows, they do what in Egypt we call a jam'iyya, which is a peer-to-peer, interest-free, rotating credit model. So again, this is something that is very specific to Middle Eastern cultures. It's a financial product. It will never come through a US or European startup where that culture or that financial product is not there. And even if you look at the other type of business, like a regional business like Souq.com, which eventually got sold to Amazon, and I mean, when they started, 90% of Souq's business was cash on delivery, right? That's a completely different model and a completely different workflow than perhaps what Amazon was experiencing. So I think there are merits to both of them. I think it's easy to discount a startup as saying, oh, this is the Egyptian Uber or the Egyptian Amazon. But the challenge in addressing the context socially, economically, and structurally for each of our local economies is a substantial one.
Yeah, I'd like to add to Wael that there is definitely challenges even in replicating a model which was done elsewhere. I personally had a lot of challenge, fundraising early on, because our idea is, building a marketplace for employment, which is not something new. Most in Egypt and the region, many people, investors back then, they said like, this is not new, so we won't fund you. In my opinion, like the best businesses are not the ones with the most creative ideas, the ones with that really solve a real problem in the market. We started like almost 7 years ago to solve the employment, matchmaking between jobs, and till now it's huge. We're still solving it. We have like more than 15,000 companies dealing with us, but it's still not solved. So there's nothing innovative in the idea. It's how the execution is done. It's not the idea, it's the execution. So brilliant. Many companies start with brilliant ideas, but then they fail in execution.
Great, okay. I've got a sign telling me that my time is up. It went very quickly. Before we go, I just want to say thank you to all of my speakers for this final panel. I'm feeling very inspired and excited and optimistic. I hope all of these stories get out and continue being told, because I think there's a lot of good stuff that's going to come out of Egypt. So before I say goodbye, I've got one announcement. We've had a conference app for the first time this year. We're very 21st century. And we had a game on the app, and we've got a winner. And the winner is Riham Issa. Is Reham in the room? You are our winner of our game, so congratulations. I think Emma, who's standing up there, has your token, so well done. You're very good. You used our app the most, so congratulations. I look forward to seeing you all in a year's time. We'll be back here on the Euromoney stage. It will be post-election, so we'll have lots to talk about. I'm feeling optimistic and excited. I hope you are too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.